Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you are tuning in from. Welcome to Eval Cafe. My name is John Akwete, and I am the coordinator of Eval Cafe here at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University, and I'll be your host for today. Though we are tuning in virtually, we would like to recognize that Western Michigan University is located on land historically occupied by Ijawa, Odawa, and Boduwami nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fire Confederacy and consider the sacred land of all indigenous people and their continuous presence, especially wherever you may be tuning in from. The Evaluation Cafe is a weekly series presented throughout the academic year that features guest speakers on a wide range of evaluation topics as evident in all our presentations last semester, and has been taking place at the Evaluation Center since the early 1980s. Though these have traditionally been in-person gathering that have been recorded and shared online continuously from last semester, this spring 2022 speaker series, while some may be hybrid, all events will be open to the public to join online regardless of location. For our 9th event this semester, we are delighted to be joined by our distinguished guest, Minji Chow. Minji is currently a doctoral student in the Evaluation and Applied Research Methods program at Claremont Graduate University. Before we get started, those new to Eval Cafe, we typically have 30 to 40-minute presentation or discussion followed by 15 to 20-minute Q&A section. Like our previous event, our guests have requested that participants submit their questions in the chat box at any point so that she can pause every few minutes to respond to those questions. So before we get started, Minji, I just want you to take a quick 30 seconds to talk a bit about your background and kind of how you ended up where you are today in your research journey. Then you can proceed with the presentation.
Great, thank you, John. Thanks for having me here. I can talk about a little bit of my background, but I think that's also something that I included in my presentation. So probably I can start with my presentation then. Can I do that? Great.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Can you see my screen? Great. Okay. Hello, everyone again. My name is Minji, and I'm a PhD student at Claremont, and today I'm here to share my study about the AEA Evaluator Competencies that I had done about, I think, a year ago. Here's the quick the contents that I'm going to share today, but because that I want to share about my story and background, let me go to the first things to share my journey to the study. You may know, or some not, I'm from Korea. So this is a little journey map of me here doing this study. So if you can see on the left side, like you can see where I start my journey from Korea. So I'm from Korea, and if you don't know, I'm from South Korea. And I did my undergraduate in social work and started my profession as a social worker. So I worked for a couple of nonprofit community-based organizations where I did the different social programs. I think I did some like a mental health promotion program, as well as some public health outreach program, youth development programs. And then I kind of shifted my profession to profit sector, where I worked for corporate social responsibilities. And then, but that was still when I did the corporate social responsibility, we had a lot of connections with the community-based organization. We did the different types of the youth development program through the community-based organization. And then I came back to nonprofit sector with my master's in international development and worked for an international organization as a program advisor. So until then, as you can see, my identity was more community-based as well as the participant-oriented, but more on the program manager and program advisor. But then as I was working on several international development projects, I was more and more engaged in monitoring evaluation. So my evaluation started as kind of accountability focused evaluation, but then I was more interested in learning and improvement because I was a project manager and program advisor. So I always wanted to improve the program. But that's where I became an accidental evaluator. And later, when I first came to CGU, I realized that there is the term accidental evaluator. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can see myself as an accidental evaluator. So when I first became accidental evaluator, I searched for many different evaluation training programs because I wanted to improve my evaluation knowledge and skills. And at the same time, I realized that, okay, it's not my individual evaluation skills and knowledge because you work on the ground with the team and with the community partners and community participants. So you wanted to improve the evaluation capacity of your team and with the people, the stakeholders that you work with. So that has been kind of my interest before I come to CGU, which is like about 5 years ago. And I moved to CGU. I came to Claremont in 2018. And I believe that was the first year that the AA officially announced the evaluator competencies. And so when I was first introduced to evaluator competencies, I was quite surprising. Oh, I didn't know that there was set of this kind of the competencies, different dimensions, domains that you need to improve as an evaluator. Then I thought that, wow, this could be really useful, not only for myself and also the team, the people that I work in the field. And at the same time that it made me question, but then because as I told you, I've been searching for so many evaluation training programs when I was still an accidental evaluator. And I've gone to at least more than 2 different programs. And a lot of those professional development, evaluation professional development trainings heavily focused on methodology. They didn't really tell me about interpersonal skills. They didn't really tell me about this professional practice. It was really more about the technical skills that related to method. So that made me wonder how those evaluation training programs are really adapting the AEA competencies and what's their program structure or design compared to the AEA evaluator competencies. So that's kind of the little journey that how I came to this study. So let me go to a little bit more specific to study. So based on my whole this personal story, I had kind of 3 purposes on my study. First, of course, to review the current evaluation training program, but specifically in the US context. The reason that I focus on the US context was these AEA evaluator competencies. Even though we have some international folks that were involved in the AA, but still quite heavily based on the US context. So I wanted to look at the training programs in the US context. And also as I reviewed these, evaluation training programs, I wanted to identify gaps and areas that are aligned with the AA evaluator competencies using their program descriptions and course descriptions. And also, as I do this study, ultimately, I want you to promote the use of AA evaluator competencies by engaging some program directors and instructors in the conversation. So getting into the study design, I had 3 research questions, pretty much the same as the purpose. So the first question, looking at the differences, similarities across the evaluation training programs in terms of their alignment with the AA evaluator competencies. And the other question was specifically looking at to what extent evaluation training programs are congruent with AA evaluator competencies in terms of their domains. And the last research question was to how evaluation training students could be improved to promote the AA evaluator competencies. And I had some exclusion and inclusion sampling criteria, as you can see. So one criteria was like whether the institution was US-based, as I mentioned, and whether that the program contains multiple courses or seminars. And also I kind of wanted to look at the professional development programs rather than the university degree programs. But there was a little bit of a caveat because a lot of the professional development programs It's kind of the single course base. It's not a sequential courses. Some professional development training programs has like a set of training program that the participant had to require to take multiple sequential courses, but most of them are just single course. So it was really hard to compare as a program. So that's the time that I decided to include a university level certificate program, which I believe that that's more accessible for accidental evaluator, because a lot of accidental evaluators are still practitioners and they don't have time to commit for the degree program. And also a lot of degree programs are quite costly. So that's one of the reasons I really wanted to focus on the professional development program. But because of this kind of the gray area of the professional development programs, I intentionally included the certificate programs at the university too. So based on those sampling criteria, I have identified 33 different training institutions, and which include 39 training programs and 435 different courses. All this data collection was done in late 2020, and the analysis was done in early 2021. After the content analysis, I conducted an interview, which was early 2021 as well. But because of the time difference, when I searched for those different trainings, the number of training or courses might have changed by this time. In my interview, I did a random sampling out of those the programs that were included in my content analysis, which I have identified 24 programs, and so 24 invitations were sent out, but only 9 accepted invitations, and so I got only 9 interview participants, which include 5 program directors and 4 course instructors. So some findings that I want to share. The first, based on the content analysis on the 39 evaluation training program descriptions and 435 courses. At the program level, only 1 program explicitly mentioning the AEA Evaluator Competencies. This means like when you review their program descriptions, they specifically mention, oh yeah, our program was structured based on the AEA Evaluator Competencies, and this program was the university-based certificate program. And in terms of specific courses, out of 435 courses, only 3 courses included the AEA Evaluator Competencies. But this is not kind of the general evaluation training course. This was specific course that were designed on AEA Evaluator Competencies. Actually were from professional development programs to from the AEA. The AEA provide the professional development courses before and after the conference, and also just through the summer institution. So the one course was like using the AEA Evaluator Competencies to enhance professional practice. And another course was also provided by another professional development institution that assessing and developing your evaluator competencies. So this is not like one, let's say, evaluation method course that's specifically mentioning that how their course is achieving the AEA evaluator competencies. Rather, it is just a course that's designed to help you understand AEA evaluator competencies. And I looked at what domains were most addressed or the least addressed. The domain, I guess, it's not really surprising. So the domain that was most addressed by the program and course description was the methodology domain. And so the analysis and the result was that all of 39 programs provide a training course to improve the methodology competencies. And out of 435 courses, 314, which is like more than 70% courses were related to methodology domain. And so I looked at specific sub-competencies, in each of the domain, the domain of the competencies have specific competencies. And 2.4, which is like determining justifying appropriate method to answer evaluation question, was the most addressed through these course and program descriptions. And whereas 2.6, conducting literature review, was addressed the least. which is, I think, not really surprising. A lot of evaluators don't really, have the good skills in the literature review. I mean, especially for the external evaluators. Um, the other thing, the least addressed domain, again, probably not really surprising, was the interpersonal domain. And 11 out of the 39 evaluation training program mentioned the interpersonal skills and knowledge in their program description. And 54 out of 435 courses address the interpersonal competencies. But important things that I want to note here, these courses are not standalone course design specifically for interpersonal competencies, meaning that the interpersonal skills and knowledge were incorporated across different courses. So for example, if the course is about participatory evaluation or empowerment evaluation, in course description, it may emphasize some interpersonal skills to learn participatory or empowerment evaluation. So it's not like specifically designed to help you improve the interpersonal skills. And under the interpersonal domain, 5.6, which is communicating in meaningful ways that enhancing effectiveness of evaluation, as most addressed, whereas 5.4, building trust throughout the evaluation, was addressed the least. But there's another also kind of the little bit of the confusion in 5.6, because not some programs and courses were specifically mentioning about this communication, but some were just very implicitly meaning like you deliver your findings to help your stakeholders to understand. So it can, the 5.6 can be interpreted all in a different ways in course descriptions as well as in the program descriptions. Another kind of area that I wanted to look at was kind of the similarities and differences across the programs. And the first thing I looked at was whether the program covered all domains or what domains of the AEA Evaluator Competencies. Only 1/3 of the program, maybe more than what I expected, but in the sample addressed the competencies from all 5 domains. But almost like half of the program covered only 4 or 3 domains, and there were still like about 17% cover only 1 or 2 domains out of the AEA 5 competencies domains. And another thing was same as what I mentioned, that the methodology domain was the kind of the major domain addressed in each of the evaluation training program, meaning that if you pick one training program and map their program descriptions and course descriptions onto the evaluator competencies, the methodology was the kind of the major domain they cover, each of the training program cover, but there is only one program that covers the context domain the most. But that was quite evident because that program was really about the grant writing and program evaluation. So they had to understand a lot of different contexts to do the grant writing. And another things that I also identified was what was the minor domain that covered in the program. As I have shared the different findings, the interpersonal domain was the least covered. So the half of the programs covered the interpersonal the least. And then 40% or 70%, 37% covered the context and planning the least. But these were not mutually exclusive. That means like if you analyze the program descriptions, the course descriptions, and map onto the AEA competencies, some were just covering only methodology or let's say the planning, but then interpersonal professional practice, like you see that nothing was really covered. So actually there are more than like 1 or 2 domains were covered the least. So all of those were the kind of the findings from content analysis. And then when I did the interview, there was some interview with the program evaluation training program directors and instructors, course instructors. I identified several themes in terms of what institution can actually do and what AEA can do to promote the use of AEA evaluator competencies. Interestingly, some interview participants admitted that they could have posted AEA Evaluator Competencies on their website and tie with their program description, but it was because, you know, the AEA Evaluator Competencies was still quite a new thing, and so they couldn't really update their website, and they acknowledged that we can post the AEA Evaluator Competencies on our website. And also some instructors were saying that we could be more direct and explicit how our courses are really in line with the AEA competencies, and how our courses will help them to develop the skills that related to AEA evaluator competencies. Another thing came out from some training program directors were reviewing their whole evaluation training program based on the AEA evaluator competencies. But for this, a couple program directors were a little bit arguing that it should be more tailored to their program purpose. It's not because, you know, there's some program, as I mentioned, like one of the program that in my sample was like their intention of their program was, even though they included some couple of the evaluation courses, but intention was like a grant writing and evaluation. So some program directors were saying this when you review that you have that adapting the AEA evaluator competencies has to be tailored to your program focus and purpose, primary purpose. The last thing the interview participant noted is that they can help training participants to reflect on their evaluation practice using the competencies. So actually using the evaluator competency as it is to reflect their practice. And they also suggested a few more things regarding what AEA actually could do. Some, I think at least 3 out of the 9 interview participants, they didn't have relationship with AEA. And 1 out of those 3 were not even aware of the AEA evaluator competencies. So some interview participants, and not only those who doesn't have any relationship with AA, but even the others who had a relationship with AA, they mentioned that increasing awareness of the AA evaluator competencies should come first. And so one participant is actually mentioning that you have to help programs understand and be knowledgeable that AA has even developed this competence model, and encouraging them to actually integrate that into their teaching. And so also some interview participants requested specific directions or guides how they can use the AA evaluator competencies, because a couple of them were more familiar with the guiding principles. And when they were first introduced to AA competencies, they were kind of questioning, okay, how these competencies are different from guiding principle and how I'm going to use this. And I feel like guiding principles are still good enough. I have no idea how to use this AA competency. It looks good and it's shorter than guiding principles, but I don't really know. And last thing that came from the interview participant was that they suggested AEA should be a more proactive and encouraging institutions and schools to incorporate the competencies in their program, because they feel like they were just very silo, and they were just waiting there, and they don't really know what to do with the competencies. So these were the key findings from my study. But of course, I have a lot of limitation in my study. But the first thing is, and also this was something that I've been kind of mentioning with my interview participant, that even though the AEA evaluator competencies provide a very comprehensive standard for professional evaluation competence, but it's not a perfect guideline. Rather, I believe it kind of leads us for future improvements. And in other words, like applying the AEA competencies to our evaluation training programs shouldn't be considered as an absolute measure for training programs. And also, as I discussed, each evaluation training program has its own purpose and primary focus. So that means a single evaluation training program or a course don't need to cover all the competencies. And another thing also that came up in my interview is that AEA competencies is still relatively new product in the field. So, and also, even though the process of creating the competencies took more than 2 years, I believe, and also, but still has not been yet informed to everyone in the field. And another thing is there's no empirical evidence yet to support that competencies would help improve evaluation training programs. So there should be more studies on that too, to actually support our argument and to encourage the institution to use the AEA competencies. And another thing, I think this was really difficult for me actually as a researcher. And because of the multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary nature of evaluation, I could not really identify all evaluation training programs. And it was really hard to identify evaluation training programs and also make the decision whether this is evaluation training program or not. And the other thing is I only review the program descriptions and course descriptions that are available online. But however, the course syllabi could be included for more information, and that information that relate to the competencies. So that's kind of the big, the things that I missed out. And last thing was as I mentioned, the interview sample was quite relatively small, especially even compared to the large number of evaluation training programs that included in the content analysis. So the interview findings, even though it kind of provide very little bit more in-depth information about the evaluation training programs, how they perceive the AEA competencies, but the sample did not really represent the different evaluation training programs from various disciplines. So that's kind of the limitation too. But although those limitations, I believe there are some good implications from the study findings, as I mentioned. This actually definitely showed the current state of the AEA Evaluator Competencies and its application to evaluation training programs. And the current status actually tells us that we need actually more outreach work that's specifically targeting evaluation training institutions like schools. And to do so, another things that we really need to do is we need to think about is to how we can actually increase the buy-in of evaluation training institutions and instructors to adapt the AEA Evaluator competencies and encourage them to be more explicit and intentional of using the AEA Evaluator competencies. And another things that we also need to think about is having more dialogues on teaching interpersonal competencies, because that was another very controversial issue with the interviewees. Some would believe that the interpersonal competencies can be taught in course or in the program, but some would kind of questioning, I don't think the interpersonal competencies can be taught. It's something that you just naturally have it or not. You just identify where is your strengths, whether it's interpersonal skills or methodological skills. So that's something that I think as an evaluation community, we really need to form this discussion and dialogues, how we can actually help evaluators to develop their interpersonal competencies. And even designing the course to improve the related to interpersonal competencies. The last thing is actually called for more studies on how the evaluator competencies can really improve the quality of evaluation training programs and actually how the AEA evaluation training, AEA evaluator competencies can be practically used. So these are the kind of implication, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Minji. We have some questions in the chat box. So the first one is from Brad. Brad Wett, he's the assistant director here at the Evaluation Center. His question is, in your research, did you look at the use of the program evaluation standard in training program versus the competency? It seems logically that the competencies might be too expansive to cover in programs that only include 1 or 2 courses, but that they might address evaluation quality. That is the first question.
Yes, I use the competencies. Can you explain a little more about what you mean that the competencies could be more expensive to cover the program?
Well, what I was trying to ask was just, I guess, an observation that, the competencies are really about making a sort of full and complete evaluator, right? And so in in a training course or a training program that only has 1 or 2 courses devoted to evaluation, it sort of maybe superficially makes sense that they wouldn't try to describe all those there, because they're not having the capacity to train you in all those areas. But because they're introducing evaluation, that maybe they would address quality. And I guess, so that's sort of my question. I know it's not the focus of your research, but I was curious whether you looked at whether they talked about the program evaluation standards in any of these courses, and just on a relative scale, how often they address those versus evaluator competencies.
You're completely right. And I think that's one of the reasons that that's the professional domain, the first domain of the competencies was kind of addressed quite a lot throughout the programs and courses, because a lot of them were generally saying the program quality as well as the program standards. So yes, but that was captured in the first domain. So I think I could see that they were kind of generally broadly seeing as like improving the general quality of evaluation practice.
Yeah, thank you. The second question is from our executive director here at the Evaluation Center, Laurie Waitgate. She's asking that, did you hear any criticism of the competency or their relevance for planning training programs?
Not like really hard criticism, but some were just questioning. As I mentioned, some were saying in my interviews, were saying we have guiding principles, and some were really quite a little bit strong that the guiding principles, the evaluation standards were pretty good enough to teach the students in their competencies. So they were like, yeah, I can see that the competency is something a little more specific to skills and things, but yeah, I don't know how to use them. So they were a little skeptical, I could feel, but not really strong criticism over the competencies. And in terms of the relevance of planning their training program, as I mentioned, some were kind of questioning, well, our program specifically just focusing on method. Like, we don't want them to have interpersonal skills. So yeah, so they were kind of questioning, like, why do we need to cover all of this? And so I was like, well, I'm not saying you need to cover all of that, but just to understand how you think about the competencies. Yes.
Laura, you can unmute if you want to follow up with your next question.
No, my next comment was, my next post in the chat was just a comment, listening, but you can react to it. Just that I think there's not always a one-to-one correspondence between like the competencies and what a course might look like, like interpersonal skills. I think in social work, programs that have an emphasis on evaluation, they really get the interpersonal skills. But in some cases where they don't, I think it's not necessarily that those skills aren't being taught, that it's coming through like mentored internships, and they're getting feedback. Students are getting feedback on interpersonal skills like that. And so, yeah, I was just making the comment that the competencies are just a mix of things that can be and should be directly taught, like how to do sampling, how to design a survey, and some things that maybe are more developed over time. There's some things in there like advocating for the field, advocating for the evaluation. You're not going to take a course on that, but maybe, it comes out in different ways in different courses and in professional settings. So it was just a general comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's kind of the similar comments from some course instructors too. They've been saying like, yeah, we don't specifically mention about this interpersonal skill, but that's somehow embedded throughout our whole programs that the students are able to develop. So yeah, that was kind of the general comments as well.
Yeah, we have a question also from Zach Tintel. He's one of our IDP doctoral candidacy program here. He says, were you able to share your working group on AEA, evaluation competency? Or if you've already done that, what involved in the group? Yes.
I don't think I shared with this specifically with the working group on the evaluator competencies, but I have shared this with Susan Tucker. I think she's the head of the working group, if that's correct. And yeah, and another one was educational team. No, I don't think so. I don't think I have presented. But one comment was from Susan was because my study, even though it included some certificate program, but it included some professional development programs, which the professional development programs, as I mentioned, were quite different in terms of the way they structure their programs. Some can be called as a program. They have a series of courses that you need to take as a sequential way, but some are not. So it was really difficult to generalize in applying the AEA competencies to professional development programs. So that's kind of the limitation that my findings probably not applicable to some other professional development programs. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if you have any question, you can unmute and ask. So I'll start firstly. Looking at the number of courses, were they like based on the university level or how? Because I wanted to find out how many universities were you able to cover within these course numbers?
The institution, I think, were 33, if I believe correctly. Yeah, 33 evaluation training institutions. So out of 33, I think 2, 3, 4, I think 29 were universities. So 20 and out of 39 programs, because some, I think there was one university had 2 different programs related to evaluation. So both were certificate program, but had a little bit of a different focus. So in terms of the program number was different. So out of 39 programs, I think about 30 or 33 programs were from university certificate programs, and the rest of them were professional development programs.
Thank you.
Was my presentation was too short?
No, that's fine.
I'll just share for what it's worth. Well, no, let's hear Peter's question, and then I'll have something to share if there's time.
So, Minji, there's a question from Peter. He says, for those programs unaware of their AEA competency, how did they initially develop the courses they wanted to offer? With what knowledge base? Do you have any information on that? When you interviewed them, what led to their development of their course program? Yeah.
A little bit I can answer because I had specifically one interview participant in his program. Their program was, he was not at all aware of not just the AEA competencies as well as AEA, but their program title was measurement and evaluation. But then if you know the emphasis on measurement, so most of their the courses were heavily focused on methodology, like, not only the basic statistics, like advanced statistics and everything. They had some kind of the project course as well in their program, but the project is still heavily focused on the methodological analysis. So I could see that so he actually shared the history, how they developed the program was, I think you just mentioned here, like based on the market demands. Yes, because I think initially their program was just a measurement, but then after all, like they saw that there's increased focus on evaluation. So they kind of titled towards to measurement and evaluation. So I could see those programs were not aware of AEA competencies, see that the needs in evaluation, so incorporate it in their program, but very limited way. I mean, that's my perspective, but for them, that's their focus. So they cover what we primarily focus on, right? but in relation to AEA competencies, it's not really looking at the other side. But he were quite open to the AEA competencies, although he really emphasized our primary focus on like developing their measurement skills, not really. They said evaluation, but for them, evaluation is like measuring things.
I was just going to share that, so I've involved with Evaluate, which is the evaluation resource hub for the National Science Foundation's Advanced Technological Education Program. So one program within the National Science Foundation, and we've been doing evaluation capacity building with them for a long time. And we wanted to figure out a really clear way to organize and plan what kinds of topics we were going to cover and what kind of skills we were going to try to help develop instead of just kind of do it in an ad hoc way. And we started out using the competencies and then just got frustrated with them for a number of reasons. And when we switched to focusing on tasks, so we really tried hard to make sure everything was consistent with the competencies, but we really focused on the doing of different things. And also this was an important switch or shift because in this context, lots of people, different people are contributing to an evaluation. It might be, you know, some of the staff on the project, it might be an institutional researcher. It's not just an evaluator who has to have all these competencies. So we switched to focusing on tasks and not really caring who did the task. And that just really makes it clearer to like, and it also allowed us to tailor the content that we are going to deliver. Like there in the competencies, there's in planning and management, there's a competency that says manages and safeguards evaluation data. And we agree that was important, but we were able to make it more specific to the context that we serve in the National Science Foundation. So it's not just managing and safeguarding data, but they have requirements that all projects have data management plans. So we were able to take that very general competency and translate it into a very specific task that includes not only safeguarding data, evaluation data, but also addressing how those data will be shared appropriately and with, you know, protecting people's privacy. So we, and it's different because it's training, it's, you know, professional development. It's not an academic program. We're not going to spend time on how to do lit reviews. And also like the communication and interpersonal stuff, no, the professional practice and the interpersonal stuff, just like we don't have capacity to tell everyone how to do everything. And so we're assuming that they're going to get like those interpersonal skills to some extent through other means, or it's, you know, because it's not an academic degree program. So what we did was try to be consistent and refer to the competencies and make sure they're compatible with what we were doing, but we used them more as a launching point to come up with this sort of master task list to organize what our evaluation capacity building activities and resources would focus on. I hope that was clear.
It was, and also that kind of reminded me about like, because when we did with my other the colleagues here, like we did another study on using the competencies, actually develop the assessment tool. Like we used the kind of the competencies, the wording itself, but kind of use that as an assessment tool that the practitioners can use to assess their evaluator competencies. And one thing that the comments that we got from some folks were actually using the assessment tool as a team to identify where our strengths and areas that we really want to focus on each of us, and then kind of coming as a collective strengths was really important. And I think that's kind of the good way that we can think about these competencies, not really that we have to do everything by ourselves, but kind of complementing to each other.
Yeah, if someone have a question, please you can unmute and ask, or if you have a contribution, you can just unmute and share your ideas and contribution.
Was this part of, you may have said this in the beginning, I came in a little bit late. Was this part of your dissertation work or just a research project or an article, or what was the impetus for this?
Just a research work. That's not part of my dissertation. I'm not yet there.
Okay.
So yeah, this was just a separate research work that I did. Yeah, but I didn't submit for any publication.
Nice.
I was wondering if you'd consider expanding your sample to include master's and PhD programs in evaluation, because it'd be really interesting. I know there's not many of them, but at the same time, it would be really interesting to see if those programs, which presumably are really intending to train evaluators, if they're actually picking up the competencies at this point. And if they aren't, sort of why? Because it's potentially very important for their student base in the future.
Yeah, that's true. The only reason, because of as I share my personal story, like I was more kind of interested in professional development sector, development training programs, because that's where more the accidental evaluator come in. But even myself in PhD programs, so I definitely see that we need to look at the master's and then PhD programs in evaluation. And actually, with my another the friend here, we are looking at the course syllabi at CGU, specifically looking at how our course syllabi addressing the AEA competencies. Yes, and also the other thing that we are kind of looking at is, some of the AEA competencies are quite really proactive word, like you advocate for the field, right? And you kind of do things. But then a lot of the syllabi is kind of being at knowledge level rather than kind of the action level. So kind of looking at that too. So hope we can get some interesting findings to inform the courses at the master and PhD program.
That's great. I think you have a lot of opportunities to expand this, whether it's for just projects in the future or for your dissertation.
Even the other thing, I think I didn't mention that, because initially I wanted to include those training participants who have been taken those training and how they think that this training have really helped them improve their competencies related to AEA competencies. But I really couldn't do that because the scope was getting larger and larger. So I had to kind of scope down. And also it was really hard to recruit those participants too. But that was another area that I've been thinking, because like we need to see if they really think these training programs help them develop these skills, or was that just kind of the knowledge level and then they kind of go out to the work and they develop the skills, right? So.
Speaking about expanding this project or research, have you considered, comparing the AEA competencies to other competencies from other evaluation society, like competencies from Canadian evaluators or any other, sort of developing evaluation fields in other countries?
So that was initially because as I mentioned, I came from international development sector. So I was more interested in not only the AEA competencies, but looking at some other all different types of competencies to review the all other type of the professional development programs, training programs in other countries as well. But then again, the scope was too large, and also the competencies, as you mentioned, the Canadian one and also the IDEAS one and international one has the competencies for the different roles as well. And I think the New Zealand or Australasia one has the competencies too, and European one has the one. But it was, but then AEA, when they developed the competencies, they actually reviewed all of those competencies. So that's why I just picked the AEA one and then pick only the program in the US just to narrow the scope down. But kind of comparing the other area that I was thinking was comparing all of those competencies and identify some common competencies to review those other professional development training programs in different countries was the kind of the area that I thought that would be really good area to study.
Yeah. So, yeah, Minji, my last question, you were saying that currently the area at which people are applying this competency is to assess individually or their team to find out if they're actually meeting all the competency. is it feasible to apply it to just an individual or within a team working on an evaluation project?
I think so, definitely. And also in our some course in SCGU, like when we do have this, the practicum course, like where the students go out for the evaluation project. So at the beginning of the course, we actually look at those competencies because they work as a team, right? And then we ask them to review these competencies first and kind of discuss within their team what competency they bring to the team. So before they work on the evaluation project, and then when they have evaluation project, we also kind of ask them to see what competencies are really important to do your evaluation project, because some evaluation project has a kind of the different context and they require the different set of skills. Some evaluation project definitely requires more interpersonal skills compared to methodological skills, but even though methodological skill is kind of the basic of the whole evaluation. So we kind of have that discussion, and I think that's really critical to have those discussions when you start the evaluation project.
Thank you very much. So thank you so much, Miji, for joining us today, and for all of you for your participation and for the questions and answers. So be sure to register for the next Eval Cafe. We'll be joined by Linda Roughtry. She's an independent consultant and the founder of Mail Tech. She will be presenting a trend in digital approaches to mail. That is monitoring, evaluating, research, and learning. I hope to see you all at that section. Thanks, and thank you for today.
Thank you.
Okay.